All right. Okay, we got a good little group here. I'll get started. I'm Ricky Taylor. Thanks for tuning in. This is my first webinar, so I'm pretty excited about it. It's a topic that I really enjoy. Hopefully, you get some good info out of it as well. Obviously, it's my first one. Since I said it's my first one, ask as many questions as you want. I'll try to keep on top of it and answer as many as I can. I've kind of set it up to where I think a lot of questions will come in with how my PowerPoint is kind of set up. It's a lot of information, so I hope you guys have some questions, and I'd be happy to answer them. So I will share my screen here, and we'll get going. All right. So here's finding your driving style. Obviously a very broad topic, and I chose Will Power. Everybody knows him as kind of the well-known fastest guy in IndyCar. So many pole positions, always really fast. But I think what a lot of people don't know is on the outside, he seems like just kind of raw speed and just kind of goes and muscles the car around. From inside the team, he's super analytical. And so for me, he was appropriate for this one. He's really good at adapting his style, learning from his teammates. Within Penske, it's very open, how you share information. And that's one of the reasons why, normally all the drivers are so close together is because all the teammates share information. And Will is really good at adapting, changing his style slightly, and kind of getting the most out of the car in all conditions. So that's why I chose him for the cover photo. And then as we look at kind of what's in store, we got our sections there. And for anybody who wants this, I think it'll be available for everybody who's watching today. And if it's not, send me a message or something, and I'll make sure you can get a copy of all the information. So first topic, kind of what makes you fast. I think the way that I ask myself a lot of questions when you're thinking about your driving style. So what do you like? And obviously this is, again, nothing to do with setting the car up, all to do with how you like the car, and how you can adjust your driving style to make it feel a little more comfortable, feel faster, and to do what you want to do. So do you like the car understeer, or are you like Michael Schumacher? You always like the car really pointy, all on the nose, a lot of front grip. It must be loose. And to another driver, that might feel like a nightmare. But for Schumacher, that's what he liked. Are you a late breaker? Are you really heavy on the pedal? Are you someone that's light on the pedal, carries a lot of speed through the brake zone, and then makes the rotation later in the corner? What kind of corners do you like? Do you like high-speed corners? Do you like low-speed corners? Do you like the technical ones, where it's kind of more sacrifice here and make it up there? Or do you like the pure commitment corners, like the bus stop at Daytona or the Kinket Road America? Those sort of corners where it's just kind of how brave are you? And so just kind of ask yourself those questions to start off. I'd say that's step one. And then why do those things give you confidence and speed? Someone that's a late breaker will excel at certain racetracks, but then when you get to a track that doesn't require sort of that heavy braking, where sometimes Laguna Seca can punish you for being too aggressive on the brakes, and then that driver can struggle when he goes there. And so hopefully out of today, you can learn to pull yourself out of that mold maybe, and to be able to change your style slightly, to keep that confidence, but to get the most out of the track and the car and the corner. And all drivers need different things to do well and to do the job at the best that they can. Two drivers can drive the same exact car, and one can be super comfortable, confident, and the other one can just say this thing is terrible and I can't drive it. And again, back to kind of the engineer mindset, the car doesn't do anything without the driver making it do something. So just keep that in your mind. Everything it does, whether it's loading up the front with the brakes or doing the opposite on throttle, all of these things with the steering, kind of how you load the car, if it's quick transitions or slower, and depending on your car in the corner, your driver inputs are really the most important thing there, and you can really make it do a lot of different things. So what are you driving? Is it front, rear, four-wheel drive, front engine, mid-engine? Just kind of go through the list of what your car is. Is it heavy? Is it light? Is it high? Is it low downforce? And something at Racers 360, when you submit a video, I never accept the video before I've seen it, because if I haven't driven that car or that situation, I might not be the best person to give you feedback on what you need to do, because every car needs something slightly different. And if it's close, I'll jump at it. But it's so situational that oftentimes your feedback will change depending on what you're driving, where you're driving, what the situation is, and how you like to drive. So really consider that in your mind of what kind of car you're driving, and what does your car do well, and what does it not do well. Is it good on direction changes? Is it one of those really stiff, light cars that you can flick back and forth? For example, through the bus stop at Daytona, does it really get through the middle there? Well, is it a big power car? Are you driving a NASCAR or a Trans Am car, or an old GT1 car, something like that? Just big power, maybe not the best traction, but it goes straight really well. Good braking car, maybe a prototype, open wheel car. Does your car rotate really well? Is it really stable? Does it have good mechanical versus aerodynamic grip? Kind of consider all these things as you kind of ask yourself questions. And I think this is the most important thing. What makes your car slow? What is your car not good at? Does your car not brake well? Does your car have poor traction? Is it nervous going into the corner? Is it nervous in the middle of the corner? Does it just not rotate? Does it just not want to turn? Does it rotate too much? So all these things, again, I think go in order with these questions that you ask yourself, and then you'll kind of be able to build all this information to come up with a plan of how you want to adapt your driving to fix these things. And this looks like a lot of ugly lines, but really it's just a line showing that everything you do on the left-hand column, these are your basic driving inputs: braking, downshifting, steering inputs, and throttle, affect every important dynamic that the car goes through. Vehicle dynamics is something that sounds like a really big, confusing word, but really it's three things. It's the weight distribution / mechanical distribution, the aero platform, and tire temperature. And basically you can affect all three of these with any of your inputs. So whether it's your braking style, whether it's the way you're downshifting, if it's late in the brake zone, if it's early in the brake zone, if you're really aggressive with your initial steering input, and all of those things, weight distribution, aero platform, tire temperature, will make your car feel either terrible or fantastic. And it's kind of just about molding those how you need it. And then once you've kind of molded it as best you can, then you can start complaining that your car's junk. So we'll keep moving on. And then the next thing is to find out kind of where those things interact with your style. Ideally, you want to find some common ground, and that should be the easiest thing, is to find the common ground of what makes you and your car both fast. That is probably what you're already doing. The difficult part comes in the compromise, and where you have to either compensate what makes you fast with what your car, if you do something really well and your car doesn't do it well, how can you kind of shift it a little bit to help your car along, or to enable yourself to do what you like to do. And again, every track, every car, every day could require a different change in style. So try not to pigeonhole yourself into a corner where you say, this is my style, I brake late in every corner. Just as an example, I'll annotate here real quick. A brake trace could look like this. This is kind of the standard hairpin corner, high downforce car brake trace. Brake trace could look like this. Square brake trace. maybe a high-speed corner where you just need to do a little speed adjustment, or brake trace could even look like something like this, where you kind of ease into it, and that could give you a completely different feeling in the car, where you know, if the car is nervous going into the corner, or you've transitioned a lot of weight onto the nose, you can try a braking style like this to maybe not shift the weight as aggressively to the front. And none of these are wrong. There's endless brake traces. I'm sure if any of you have driven at Sebring, you know, turn 17, there's a million lines. And the same goes with brake traces, throttle traces, and you can really manipulate your car balance a lot with that. And so we'll keep moving along here. So mentally, again, as I've said, what does my car need to go faster, and how can I manipulate or adapt my driving to manipulate that? Sorry, I got a question here. Let's see, let's get to a question. Turn one at the Glen. As far as brake traces, it's downhill, so there's a couple different things. What car you're driving, if it's a high downforce car, obviously you can be much more aggressive at the brake. But I'd say if you're in something heavy, if it's a GT car or something, the tendency will be that it's front tire limited. It'll be rear limited early because it's coming downhill, so it's not going to want to stop. So Miata. So pretty, you're going to want to be pretty light with the brake pedal, I'd say. It's a big momentum corner, super long straightaway that's uphill. And so there's a couple different things. You're very exposed from the wind, so the wind could be coming from anywhere. In a Miata, that might not affect you too much. And then think, I need exit speed. That's going to be the big priority, especially in a Miata. Not a lot of power, quite tire limited. So you're not going to want to really overload the front tire when you get into that compression. You're going to have plenty of grip when it hits the compression as you get into the apex. You're going to want to be lighter on the brake there and have your rotation done before it hits that compression. So if you can get the car, let's annotate again. If you can get sort of this brake rotation, this brake trace, something lighter, and have the rotation coming around here, get the car rotated early and back to throttle early. That way when you hit the compression at the apex, being front tire limited, hopefully it doesn't just scrub the front and then delay your back to throttle time. So again, that's kind of taking into consideration what your car needs and all the conditions. Hopefully that kind of helps a little bit there. But again, I'd say with that car, you're focused mainly on exit, whereas in a prototype, really barrel it in there on the brakes. It's not as tire limited. It's got a lot of downforce, so you're going to want to keep the weight on the nose. So if this is a prototype, the brake trace would look much more like this, where you can carry more brake weight in the brake zone and rotate the car later. But for a Miata, you're trying to protect that front. It's going to always be at its limit. So yeah, that's a good question, and that's such an important corner. So we'll keep moving along. So yeah, what does my car not allow me to do, and how can I overcome it? With the Miata example, my car does not allow me to kind of rotate in the middle of the corner. Is kind of, I think, the tendency of that corner, because you get into the compression and just gives up. So try and get the car rotated early, and you'll do that with the brakes coming down the hill before you hit the compression, and then hopefully when you hit the compression, you're full throttle. And in higher horsepower cars, you're probably not able to get full throttle quite that early. So here are your tools. Everybody knows pedals are probably the most important tool you have. Steering, brake bias if it's adjustable, and ABS if it's an ABS car. These are incredibly powerful tools. You can use them to do many things with the car, and help it to get it to do something that makes you a little more comfortable. If it's let's say turn one at Sebring, and the car's too nervous going in, like you touch the brake and it's just too nervous. Try it with a lift, or try it with a little bit more front bias, or slow your hands down, or turn in early and induce a bit of understeer, kind of overload the front tires. And if it's a hairpin, or turn to a Laguna, I think we have an example coming up later. Your brake bias and how you're braking is through the brake zone really affects your balance mid to exit as well. Tire temperature lives with you longer than you think. So use your tools, and those are all really, really powerful to do kind of what we're trying to accomplish in this seminar. So here's the first example. I'm a late breaker. This is the theoretical driver. I'm a late breaker, but I always lose on exit. Driving a Trans Am car, which is big, heavy, lots of horsepower. Also, I'd say very tire limited. Not a lot of downforce. It's really good at going straight. Really not good at braking. Minimum speed's quite low, and terrible at sort of combined. And when you hear somebody talk about combined grip, it's braking and turning at the same time, braking and turning at the same time, or throttle and brake, or throttle and steering at the same time. So, so the goal, you're trying to help it do what it does best. You're probably not going to get around that fundamental issue it has with being bad at combined things. So I've got, in the corner we're looking at is turn 2 at Laguna. Hard braking, low speed, 180-degree corner. Looks kind of like this. It's sort of a double apex, and sorry, that's better. Sort of a double apex corner, but I don't think of it as a double apex corner. This first apex is sometimes not super important depending on your car, but basically really hard braking, very tight first gear corner. So this whole phase of the corner is going to be difficult for a Trans Am car. So either you try to minimize that portion of the corner, the amount of steering and the amount of inputs you're trying to do there, or you make it easier on the car. And so I have two proposals for you. The first one, there's a lot of words here, so I'll kind of sum it up. Here, let's go to the question first. If car understeers, how often is that caused by the driver? It's caused by the driver. It can, or you could say that every understeer is caused by the driver because the car's not going to do anything on its own. But I'd say at a certain point, it becomes the car's just going to understeer, and there's nothing you can do about it. The Subaru 4-wheel drive probably gonna have a tendency to understeer. The things you can do to prevent understeer, as we go back to our tools, you've got your steering, you've got your brake, you've got your brake bias. So rear-wheel drive BRZ, try and use your tools. What kind of corner is it? If it's a hard braking corner, is it something where you're already off the brake and the car's understeering, it won't turn? Then maybe you have to try and maybe not brake later, but brake lighter and longer through your brake zone, so that instead of your car's loaded through the brake zone, and then you're kind of getting to the corner here, you're braking, and then if the car's coming up, and then that's when your understeer is picking up, rather shift your brake point from here, maybe to here, and so you keep the weight on the nose to carry it through the corner. But it can also go the other way around. If you're on the brakes so hard and it's just going over what the limit of the front tire can do, and you notice that your understeer is coming with the brake, back your brake point up, see if it gets better, or keep your brake point, or back it up and lighten your brake pressure, so that instead of being super loaded on the front and not being flat, it's partially loaded. So it's not 1,000 pounds on the front wheels, it's 500 pounds on the front wheels, to not just completely oversaturate the front tires. And so there's lots of things you can do. Turning too fast can induce understeer. So that's a long answer, but just I'd say experiment in sort of an understeer corner when you're facing those things. And I'd say a really good reference for you guys when you're trying to find the limit would be, I think Mike Skeen did a webinar on finding the limit. So checking that out, I think would also be a really good resource. Another question, trail braking be appropriate here? I've only driven a Skippy car there and tended to drop wheels on the exit. So we'll go to the, back to the slide. I think this will give you two kind of styles. As I kind of drew it earlier, let's just draw the corner over everything. This is the corner. Very poor drawing. The first approach, since this driver is a late braking style driver, I would recommend trying just like a diamond technique. So this is just kind of your style. You keep the rotation in the middle of the corner and try to rotate the car as quickly as possible. So that way the car is doing one thing at a time. In this phase of the corner, you're turning very little with brake. In this phase of the corner, you're on throttle. In this phase of the corner, you're steering. So you're trying to let it do one thing at once, which it wants to do. And that way you're able to get back to throttle, has got lots of power. And so you're gonna make as much time as you can before turn 3. And you're also gonna use your late braking style in the brake zone. So that's gonna hopefully give you that confidence. But by the time you get to this point here, you're off the brake and let the car roll and do what it wants to do. The second style, this is, I think, a really interesting style. Instead of really pitching the car in, having it be nervous, doing two things at once, something I'd say a little more creative to try would be, as we talked about earlier, not attacking the brake quite as much, where the first style, the car would be right on the nose, a lot of weight, the rear is up in the air. You're probably, people talk about micro locking the tires. You're probably locking the tires a little bit through the whole brake zone, which is increasing the tire temperature. The weight is on the nose, so it's going to be nervous. And so the style I would think to try and fix that would be just a lighter brake zone, a lighter brake pressure through the brake zone. So the car is just a little more gentle on the front tires. The rear has better traction. Maybe you're able to run a little more rear bias. And the tires are cooler. The rear tires are cooler. So when you get to this phase of the corner, it's going to do those two things that we talked about a little bit better than with that first braking style. So you're able to kind of arc it more normally. And that brake, the tire temperature, if you actually look at some complicated data that sometimes I don't, most times I don't understand, but the engineers explain to me, things that are happening here, you're building brake temp or tire temp all the way through the brake zone, and you're still feeling that here, maybe even for the rest of the lap. So depending on what follows the corner, your braking style here could be punishing you all the way through. And so by using a light brake pressure going in, you could even see better rear grip mid-corner. It could do the combined better mid-corner, and you could even have better traction. These aren't guarantees, but just things to try, things to think about in different situations. So we'll keep moving. Example 2, I don't know if anybody has any questions on that first example, but this is a bit of a different one, totally different car style. This is the Schumacher driver, where you need a strong front, but the car won't turn. I'm sure Michael Schumacher was much more advanced than I am, and he'd be able to drive around this. But let's say this driver's driving an IMSA Lights car or IMSA Prototype Challenge car. Lightweight, low horsepower, very high downforce for its weight. It's really good in high-speed corners, good in the brake zones, really good in direction changes. Poor, where it's poor is low-speed corners, bumps. So of course we'll take it to Sebring, and we'll look at turn 15, which is a medium-speed right-hander, which kind of feeds into 15A, 15B, 16 onto the back straight. So sometimes people think of it as a compromised corner, but for this sake, being an IMSA Lights car, it's very good at direction changes. Don't really need to sacrifice much. So we're going to treat it as just turn 15. And something to consider is the type of corner. So the first thing to consider is this corner is always understeer. It's most of the time an understeer corner. So Schumacher's going to be hating it. It's very exposed to the wind, and being an IMSA Lights car, very dependent on aerodynamics. If you have a headwind, you're going to suddenly feel like, man, I figured this corner out. Nobody can touch me here. But then next session, wind flips around. It's completely in the middle of nowhere, so very exposed to the wind, and a tailwind is just going to ruin your day. So what can we do to try and overcome that? The tailwind is going to be hard to overcome, but there's a lot of factors in this corner that can help you. And so all the words on this page you can kind of read later, but kind of our focus is going to be what makes this car good. And that's going to be trying to get as much front downforce as you can, which means carrying the brake into the corner. Generally, it's not going to be tire limited, so you can really lean on that front tire. Getting the nose close to the ground is going to give you a lot of downforce. So carrying the brake further into the corner, you're going to want to try to add as much load onto the front tires as you can. And a good trick there is that inside curb will add load to the inside front tire. So if the right front is wanting to lock, that curb is going to stop it from locking and help hook you around the corner. And an extremely aggressive approach, which isn't recommended unless for qualifying and something's diabolical, is actually hooking the inside wheel inside the front curb, because there's a step and you can actually hook it. So a couple of weird sort of out of the box approaches there. And so hopefully that will help you with your issue. Beyond that, experimenting with your brake point, how much brake pressure you're using. At the apex with this car, you should be able to carry the brakes late into the corner. But then as kind of a flip side, I've got a second scenario where, say this is a Camaro, like a Pilot Challenge Camaro or something, or back in the Continental days it was a Camaro, just really heavy. The tire is not the greatest, so just the inherent part of the car where it's heavy and the weight wants to all go to the outside. Carrying the brakes into the apex is just going to make your issues worse. So in that case, maybe trying to back up your brake zone, put less load on the outside front, and again, anything to help the front's going to help. So still using that inside curb. With a Camaro, you're probably those guys are probably using all of that inside curb and hooking it every lap. But just depending on the car, depending on the track, depending on the wind direction, and anybody that's been to Sebring knows that the temperature will also make the track go up and down. So those are two examples I've got for you, with kind of endless solutions, I'd say. I don't know all the solutions. I'm still trying to learn, and you always learn from your teammates and anybody that you can see drive. So between all of us at Racers 360, hopefully we can give you some ideas that we've tried in our experience for you. So on my last page, on the closing here, before I answer some questions, a number of driving styles are endless. I think understanding what is causing your problems and knowing how to manipulate the attitude of your car is going to improve what will dictate your new style. So in brief, just kind of ask yourself lots of questions, and how can I use my tools, my pedals, my brakes, my throttle, my steering, if you have brake bias, if you have ABS, if you have anti-roll bars in the car, what can I do with basic understanding of the vehicle dynamics to help me fix these issues. And ultimately, I think not having a style and being able to adapt to a certain track, to a certain car, to a certain corner, to a certain time of day, condition, wind direction, all these things will make you a better race car driver, and something that we're all working on, obviously. And yeah, I think there's a lot to take in, but the big questions, just ask yourself lots of questions, and I think, as all of us do, we're always trying to be better, and try and be creative with your driving style, and it takes time. I was talking to Dion before this webinar, and we were both kind of discussing the frustration that your driving style, in order to make changes, you kind of need time to try things, and you don't want to try it on qualifying or in the race, and not everybody has the luxury of time. And but the more time you have, just experiment and try things. And if you have data, look at the data and study what worked and what didn't and what makes you confident. So yeah, if you have any questions, I'm here to ask, to try and tackle them. So let me get out here. What's your personal approach to either doing a qualifying or TT lap, warm-up lap preparation, and then getting the most out of it for a short 1 to 3 laps versus a long stint? That's a great question. Everything's so situational. I feel bad. I feel bad kind of saying it's situational. Let's say we go to Sebring. Let's think of a better one. Let's say we go to Watkins Glen, since it's come up already. I know where's the Laguna. Laguna is a great one. Really high tire wear, and this is one of my favorite places to go qualify, because you have to really prepare qualifying well because it's so hard on tires. You know, one lap is all you get, and it's so. And I think this comes with practice. Like you do a mock qualifying if you have the luxury to do it, or you kind of get the gist over your experience. But at Laguna, you're actually going out of the pits really easy, and you're not even scrubbing the tires at all, not putting any heat in the tires until you get to the corkscrew, and you've only got fuel for 1.5 laps. And you know, if you mess it up, then it's your fault. But then you just basically push, getting heat just through the brakes, not scrubbing the tires, using the heat of the brakes to heat the wheel and heat the tire just to get the internal temp, because oftentimes the internal temp is what gives you the grip, and the external temp will oftentimes take away your grip. So scrubbing it might actually take some away from your qualifying lap, and then basically hit it as hard as you can. Whereas somewhere like Watkins Glen, or Mid-Ohio, really easy on tires, and you want fuel for the whole stint, because the track will keep improving. Also Sebring a little bit, depending on the time of day when your qualifying is, and just go out and burn fuel, let the track rubber up. And if you know it's going to rubber up, maybe you go for the Laguna style if you think you can bring your tires in, and go out when the track is grippy and let everybody else rubber it in for you. But in general, I'd say it's very situational. And for me, it's track to track. If the tires are coming in fast, then I like to just do it. You know, you're ultimately going to be the fastest with the least fuel on the newest tires. So that's kind of my approach there. Any more questions? All right, how long have we been going? Let's see here. All right, more questions. How often are you driving solo as your own race engineer? Not much these days. Only when I'm driving my go-kart. So they don't let me start that car. I don't know how to start it without anybody near me. So unfortunately, we don't get a lot of track time with how pricey it can be. So driving my go-kart is kind of my best opportunity just to go out and try practice stuff. We've always got whenever we're on track with the prototype, it's all hands on deck. So you're lucky to have all the resources to help you go as fast as possible, and that's something that that you often use as an excuse. But the nice thing about having teammates is when we're at the track, I think the most valuable thing on a test day that we use is that we don't really get to use much on the race weekends is looking at data with your teammates and learning. Everybody says Elio Castroneves is like a parrot inside the team, because you can copy whatever you do, and that's a great talent. And so on test days, if he starts off behind, you know by the end of the day he's going to get there. And then having the race engineers obviously helping you to ultimately go faster with the car setup. Back in the day, you were quick at Lime Rock. Could you talk about how to drive it quick in a low horsepower car? Thank you. Oh, Abby. Yeah, we met at Skip Barber back in the day. Yeah, Lime Rock is a fantastic track. We obviously did the full fast track with the uphill, um, uphill no chicanes, and in a low horsepower car, it's momentum. Um, and it's funny, even driving these days, like I drove the Skip Barber at Lime Rock on the simulator the other day, and you're still picking up things like turn one is when you look at it visually, it looks like a hard break. It looks like a hard braking corner, but it's such a long corner that the lap time doesn't come from the braking point. The lap time comes from carrying the speed through the brake zone, the speed from the time you touch the brakes to the middle of the corner, and not that time that you're full throttle, getting to that late brake point. So really a light brake zone or very light brake pressure long into the corner. Whereas if you just moved your brake point later and kept your heavy brake pressure, you wouldn't be able to carry that speed past the first apex, especially in a Skip Barber car. The rear would just be all up in the air, and then your timing and your weight would be wrong when you get to the middle of the corner because you'd be trying to recover it. And so being such a long corner, you're trying to do everything gently through there. And then I'd say the rest of the track is momentum. Anything you can do to be light and smooth and get back to throttle sooner, and even no mechanic or engineer is kind of like anybody saying this, but a little bit of gas and brake, a little bit of left foot braking can make it feel a lot more comfortable and be really smooth and improve a lot of those balance issues. Okay, Angelica, since you obviously have to adjust your driving style to different tracks, corners, track conditions, etc., how do you go about finding your style in the first place? I know that was the caption of the whole PowerPoint there, but I would say, what makes you comfortable? Are brake zones where you feel the most comfortable? Do you feel the most comfortable in high-speed corners, low-speed corners? Like I said, where do you feel the happiest? Does your car just give you the confidence to do certain things? Again, I'd go back to the Finding Your Limit webinar with Mike Skeen. My style, I'm always trying to not have a style. I'm trying to be able to adapt. For example, in Sebring, your brake trace in turn 1 is different from your brake trace in turn 3, different in turn 7, different in turn 10, and very different in turn 17. And so I'm trying not to have a style, but you'll always have things that make you confident and make you comfortable. And you can use those things, I think, to help you manipulate it to make you feel happier. So like we said with the Laguna Seca example, if you're a confident braker and you're in turn 2 at Laguna and you're in a Trans Am car, a NASCAR, or something that does not brake well, focus on the diamonding the corner. That'll help you to brake well. If you're not a good braker and you like to carry if for some reason, if you're not strong enough to push the brake pedal, which is a thing, some brake pedals are very heavy, and you get to the corner and you do the rotation later in the corner instead of using the brake to rotate it early, you're kind of slowly rotating it later. That could be your style, and that could be what makes you happy. Maybe you've always been a light braker. So I'd say start with what makes you comfortable, what makes you confident and happy, and then kind of work from there using your tools, asking yourself the questions about your car, what can help you to do those things. Ben, you don't get any track time or any less professional cars, DPI all the time. That's true. Yeah, I got to do that seat swap with Trent in the NSX, which was awesome. So getting to experience ABS again. I experienced it with the Cadillac GT3 car as well. But kind of over the years is where I've been able to drive different cars, and hopefully next year I'll get to, maybe not this coming year, but maybe next year we'll get to do some more GT3 races and things like that. But most of the time, anytime I get to go to the racetrack, nobody's gonna let me drive it unsupervised, let's say. Nathan, what is the best way to train yourself to get into consistent rhythm like you would need in an endurance race with 2+ hour stint and night driving. The big thing that's going to help you be consistent is being comfortable and being relaxed. Unfortunately, time is the biggest tool for doing that. I think as an endurance, with endurance in mind, as I just said, gas and brake can make the car feel more comfortable. That's probably not what you want to do. As far as saving brakes, using both pedals at the same time is not good for brakes, not good for fuel mileage, but maybe good in certain situations to make the car feel a little more relaxed. Best way to train yourself, there's a lot of goofy ways, like people have said about night driving, wearing sunglasses in the day, but I don't believe in any of that. I think night driving is going to be what it's going to be. Make sure you've had your eyes checked. I wear glasses in the car. It was something that I thought my eyes were okay, and I got them checked, and it turned out I needed glasses. And one thing that improved greatly was my night vision, and I can see much better. If you wear contacts, sometimes that can bother you in the car. In terms of training yourself, I'd say any physically, cardio, anything that kind of stresses yourself cardiovascularly, and sim driving is fantastic. I think as everybody says, it's inaccurate, as inaccurate as it could possibly be. Sim driving, even if it's totally different from what it really is like, it helps you mentally to stay focused, and your brain is a muscle. And I think exercising your brain, I haven't been following on all the webinars, but I'm pretty sure I've seen Dion talking about some mental training. So whether it's sim, whether it's Lumosity, whether it's some sort of mental training software that you've found, whether it's, I don't know if reading applies, but things that just like really stimulate your mind and just keep you actively focused for extended periods of time. I think you will notice a difference training that, and that's something that the sim has actually helped me with even more, because you're not totally engaged. When you're in the car, you're focused. You have to be focused, and in the sim, it's easy to wander. So so that even further, I think, accelerates your mental training. So that would probably be another big thing for me, and I'm pretty sure Dion has a lot of advice for you there, and some of the other coaches too. I think that's all. Oh, there we go. What's your top 3 hardest corners in IMSA for you personally? Okay, I'll try to go away from Sebring. So number 1, turn 17 at Sebring is always really tough. Such an interesting corner between the bumps. That's also something I kind of didn't hit on too much with kind of the questions to ask yourself, or the track conditions, because bumps are something in the case of Sebring that you want to avoid, and to maintain the platform, and whether that's aerodynamic platform or mechanical platform, bumps hurt both of them. And so turn 17 at Sebring is got to be up there. Let's say number 2. Let's go somewhere we haven't gone before. Oh, Mossport. Mossport turn 5 up the hill. I think it's called Moss Corner. It's an uphill braking right-hander that kind of decreases into the second right-hander, and then his first gear with kind of a compression going out. It kind of goes every single direction, and it's hard because it's this steep, and so your brake zone is about 25 meters. It's extremely short. You hardly use the brakes because you're so hard into the hill, and then you have to release the brakes super quickly because you get to the crest and the car lightens up, and the more you're on the brakes, it makes the rear nervous. But the more you release the brakes, then you get into another vehicle dynamic that we didn't talk about, which is the diff opens up. So you lose that diff preload in the middle, and so you try to hold a little bit of brake, and then at the end, you're kind of front limited, so you add a little bit more brake again, and you try to get on the throttle as soon as possible to get out. And that might be number 1. That is a corner that you never feel like you get right. And then for number 3, let's go with Laguna Turn 2. Really tough. Let's try to go somewhere that we haven't talked about yet. Let's go to Carousel Road America. Really tricky. It's super line sensitive. And there's a lot of different approaches you can do with the pedals. I'd say it's very pedal sensitive. Driving wise, there's really, line wise, there's only one line. Maybe you can kind of time it differently as you go in. But if you really get detailed, there's a little compression in the middle. And you try to time it to where you've got the rear rotating to where it catches the rear right at that compression. And then you can make it. And that timing is really difficult. And in qualifying, that's another one like Laguna, where you do a slow out lap and start qualifying. Nailing the carousel at Road America is the key to the pole. So yeah, having a really strong front and nailing that compression there is very important. So top 3. What's the oddest technique you've tried that was actually faster, like perhaps forcing understeer or jerking the wheel to straighten the car? Bus stop Watkins Glen, uphill license of BIR seem to invite that sort of thing. Yeah, no, that's really a good point. We'll talk about the bus stop at Watkins Glen first before we go to the oddest technique, because I've definitely got a couple of those. Bus stop at Watkins Glen, it's a direction change, and depending on how you take those first 2 curbs, how well your car will take those first 2 curbs, determines where you're going to be positioned in the middle. Ideally, you want to be kind of inside of that groove to get that 3rd and 4th curb. And then in terms of inducing understeer, the car can get, if for some reason you brake a little bit too late, you can induce understeer, just snap off the brake, crank the wheel back to the left, and sometimes that'll kind of oversaturate the front, because the front can't do that many things at once. So if you snap off the brake, crank the wheel in, okay, the rear feels better, and then you can kind of think about getting back to throttle. But ideally, that rhythm would be smoother. But for some reason, if your car is just diabolical and it's just stuck on the front and you can't get it to do anything, and you're confident enough to crank the wheel, because sometimes if you crank the wheel, the front will go, and then that becomes a real moment. But if you're confident enough and you can kind of do those things and consider the weight at the same time, and you're not on the brakes at the same time you try to crank it, that could work. And then the oddest technique, it's kind of where I get my inspiration for not having a style is Montoya. And I think of any teammates I've had, I've learned the most from Montoya and Max Angelelli. And Max Angelelli, I'd say, is just textbook, most beautiful data you can look at. Brake traces are all perfect. Steering traces, he was so smooth that you thought it was a computer driving. Where my steering traces, I was chasing it and it didn't look very smooth, but his were just beautiful lines and just perfect. And then you look at Montoya, and he never does the same thing twice. But he's incredibly fast, and mentally he's one of the toughest drivers and most adaptable drivers I've ever seen. He can change his driving style every corner and maintain the lap time and do it in so many different ways, just depending on what the car needs. Whether it's gas and brake, whether it's cranking the steering wheel in. And I'll just say the oddest technique that I've tried has got to be, going into turn 2 at Laguna and just try and gas and brake, or Mid-Ohio in the wet, try and gas and brake for the pure idea to build tire temperature. I was struggling with the wet, and we looked at the data, and my tire temperature was a step lower, and so it just sounded bizarre that I needed to overlap gas and brake to just get my tire temp up to match them, and gas and brake, tire temp came up, boom, all of a sudden I had grip, and And so that's just like, as soon as you think there's nothing else I can do, there's so many times where it's happened where I've been able to change something that I'm doing to help my issues. So, and then a story I've heard, it's kind of a legend, but Montoya, when he won his first Indy 500, I think the car was too pointy, and he did just what your question was, Tim, and he was cranking the wheel in and inducing understeer and deliberately hurting the front tires to balance the car. So yeah, that was a pretty cool story. How would you describe your own driving style if you had to explain it to an engineer? I'd say I'm more on the traditional style. My brake traces normally look a little bit more standard, sort of peaky, then trailing off. That's my natural tendency. That's where I'm most comfortable. Recently, I've been getting better about finding ways to work in my sort of gentle initial brake pressure. But I'd say that I'm someone that likes. I think when I talk to an engineer, I tell them kind of what I want, and it always ends up sounding like I want the perfect car. I want a good car on the brakes. I want the rear to be really strong. But as soon as I'm coming off the brakes, I want the front to be really strong. That's how I would explain my style to an engineer in terms of what I want to make me the most comfortable, because I want to be able to do my heavy initial brake trace and have the rear be really strong. And then when I'm trailing off the brakes, I want the car to be able to rotate and have a really good front when I'm coming off the brakes. And so hopefully he or she can give me some tools, whether it's a stiffer front spring to prop the front up under braking, or a lower rear ride height with a stiffer rear spring, so that through the brake zone is a little lower, but it rotates better in the middle, something like that. But that's the engineer's job, and they always, in my experience, they always do a fantastic job of giving me that. And then, but I think in my case, sometimes when you're driving with a teammate, you both can't have each other's dream car. So that's where kind of learning those different tendencies can really help you. And back to Will Power for a second. One of the things that kind of inspired me about his detail is the toe of the boot at Watkins Glen. I was looking at some data. He just does some incredible things with the brake pressure there. And I'm not going to go into it. I feel like I'm giving up secrets of his. But he would just do like such detail-oriented things to weight the car how he wanted. And it's quite a unique corner. So it was something that I learned my own approach, or I tried to adapt his approach to how I wanted to drive it. And then I did it, and maybe, I don't know if I executed it as well as he did. We were in different cars. But then I saw Dane doing it, Dane Cameron, our other teammate in the 6 car, doing it a different way. And he was doing a similar approach, but he was arcing the car in much later, using a much slower initial steering input, and kind of loading the tire differently into the corner. And again, that was something that kind of changed my style, as I needed to try and adapt that, because I was always struggling on exit because I had too much wheel and I couldn't go to throttle. But Dane was always much straighter, so using more steering, getting the car turned, going into the corner, and having his hands straight going up the hill. Sounds simple, but it took me a while to kind of get my head around it. I don't see any more questions. I'll give it another minute if anybody else has a last question here. This was a lot of fun. Thanks for all your questions so far. Hopefully I was able to give some good input, and hopefully this was helpful for you guys. I think for me, doing coaching in general helps me to think about myself, and allows me to see other driving styles, allows me to see other cars, other tracks, and makes me think of solutions that could help me sometimes. So these kind of things are great, and I love doing them. So if you have any also suggestions for future webinars or things like that, I would love to be able to participate and to hopefully do one. But yeah, until, oh, I think we have one more question. Oh, nope, we got that one already. What are the top things you see in amateur drivers as Race to 360 coach, limiting their driving styles? That's a good question. It kind of goes, I've seen a little bit of each. I've seen the guys that are really committed on the brake zones. I'd say in general, it's repeating things, and it's just repeating the same issues. And I think that's the point of having a coach. I think any of us without, or for me, without data, I wouldn't know what I'm doing wrong. And without a coach, I wouldn't know what I'm doing wrong. And so having some other input to tell you, try this, try that, and kind of taking into consideration what kind of car you are. Maybe somebody that the engineer understands vehicle dynamics way better than I do. And so they're able to tell me things like, try the overlap or things like that. But in amateurs, I'd say finding the limit and understanding what side of the car is giving them the issue and how to react with the pedals. I think the pedals are your biggest tool. And so I'd say pedal control and pedal feel has got to be the biggest thing. I was watching Wickens Twitch on for the IMSA race tonight on iRacing, and you can see, and I was actually thinking to myself, I wonder what his, obviously he's under very challenging circumstances, but watching him with his hand on the handbrake, you have such good feel with your hand. I wonder how, now that he's been kind of forced into that situation, if he'd have a lot of sort of advice or kind of insight into how well your hand can feel the brake, and really places a lot of importance on your brake feel. And I think that's why a lot of people feel comfortable braking with their right foot, is a lot of times your right foot has a better feel. And as a long answer, maybe that was something, that was probably the thing that I see the most in amateur drivers, whether it's braking too late, whether it's braking too long, whether it's holding the brake too long, with too much pressure, whether it's releasing too early, just kind of those things. All right, I think that's all, those are all the questions. Thank you very much, guys, for joining. Oh, we have two more. Okay. Thanks, guys. I hope it was helpful. I hope it's not too much information. If there's anything else you want me to go more in depth into, maybe we could do another webinar on something more specific. But thanks for the questions. Thanks for participating. It was a lot of fun. Hope to see you guys at the track sometime. Bye-bye.